The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it'll never be this slow again. They were the words of Justin Trudeau at the World Economic Forum, even before the significant changes we've been experiencing in the last couple of years due to COVID. Moving forward, a raft of demographic changes are going to fall into place to make Australia look very, very different in 10 years' time in 2031. And this was the basis of a major research paper, Australia Towards 2031, by leading demographer Mark McCrindle, who's my guest on today's show to discuss the demographics, the consumer, the behavioural trends that are going to be shaping our nation over the next decade. Now, it's going to be critical to understand these changes as a property investor because demographics are going to drive our destiny. But today's show is also going to be useful for you if you're in business or planning a future career or your life. Wouldn't it be nice to know what the world's going to look like in 2031? Well, hopefully at the end of today's podcast, you're going to have a better understanding. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Only occasionally in history do massive demographic changes combine with huge social shifts, ongoing generational transitions, and unprecedented technological innovation so that within a span of a decade or so, society alters altogether. Australia's currently in the midst of one of such transformations. Hey, they're not my words, but the words of my guest today, leading demographer and futurist Mark McCrindle, who's recently published a report, Australia Towards 2031. And that should help us understand the demographic, the consumer and the behavioural trends that are shaping our nation. Now, Mark's a social analyst, a demographer, a futurist, a social commentator, and he's got an international following and he's an advisor to executive boards and committees around Australia. So I'm sure you're going to get some benefit. Welcome, Mark.
Great to be with you, Michael. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Now, Mark, I was fascinated to read your report, Australia Towards 2031, with your forecasts of what's going to happen to our nation in the next decade. Now, I'm looking forward to discussing these with you. But before we do, I actually am currently finding it hard to make plans 10 days ahead with COVID and with lockdowns. How accurate do you think your forecast can be 10 years ahead?
Well, that's a really good point. When it comes to future predictions, we've got to have the right methodology because we are in these fast-moving times where, as you said, those timeframes have contracted over which we can realistically get a sense as to what's happening. I mean, think for a moment, 10 years ago, as we're in the 2010s, looking forward to the 2020s, who could have predicted Me Too movement and the mental health challenges and the fact that states in Australia would become so important. We hardly even knew where the borders were when we drove over them. That cryptocurrency would emerge. Obviously, a global pandemic in terms of what we've seen with COVID was not what we were expecting. And then you've got electric vehicles and Black Lives Matter and conspiracy theories and fake news and all of this stuff that has transformed our era that was hard to predict. But some of the precursors to that was predictable. What we do when it comes to looking forward to the trends is look at the current realities, what are the current trends emerging, what are the demographic projections that we can make based on what we're seeing today so that we have some level of certainty around these trends. If we can, if you like, triangulate on the future by getting a few of these forward forecasts and giving us a picture of what's to come. So that's the methodology on which we base our future predictions.
Excellent. Well, let's start with what's on the mind of many Australians. Most of us are wondering, will life return to normal? Will we be able to have Saturday sports? Will we be able to have kids' birthday parties, go out with friends? Am I going to be able to hug and kiss and handshake people again, Mark?
Yeah, we sure are. I heard someone say recently, and they were misinformed, they said, oh, you've probably had your last handshake. You probably won't shake hands again. That's not the case. We are, as human beings, relationally connected. Even though we can do this Zoom technology, we are wired to connect well with people in situ, in the room, face to face. We're tactile beings. The physicality of our lives is important. And so handshakes and hugs and the embracing will be something of the future, just as it's been in millennia past. And we do, as humans, we're very resilient. We have, in some ways, short memories. And it won't be too long before the backslaps, the hugs, and the handshakes are back, because that's something of what it is to be human. And after this pandemic, the crisis of it passes, we'll be back to a lot of that. And it's important that we do.
That sounds really good. Let's discuss some of the major trends from your report, Australia Towards 2031. What's Australia going to look like in 10 years' time, Mark?
Well, we'll be larger than we are now. And keep in mind that, yes, we've had closed borders for 18 months now, and migration has been almost 2/3 of our growth over the last decade. So clearly, our population growth has slowed. In fact, the birth rates have hit the lowest ever recorded in our history. So natural increase is not doing much in Australia either. But we will get back to those migration flows that we knew. We might settle a little bit below where we were, probably more like 200,000 net growth per annum through migration rather than 230,000 we have been seeing. And it's probably going to take us the best part of this decade to get back to that. But we've got whole sectors of our economy that rely on those international students, that rely on the skilled visa programs, that rely on tourism and long-term holiday makers and seasonal workers. And so the economy in Australia is geared up for that migration, for those long-term arrivals. That's why we will get back to it. And therefore, the cultural diversity of our nation, growth through migration and population increase is what we see over the decade ahead. Now, keep in mind that even though the population growth rate has slowed, the speed at which we've been adding each new 10 million has increased. So, for example, to go from 10 million to 20 million, and we got to 20 million in 2004, that took 46 years. But to add our next 10 million from 2004, we're going to get there in 2034. It's going to take just 30 years. So that's the growth that we expect around the 30 million mark in around a decade's time, and the growth and the migration and those global connectivities that we did know will come back to normal over this decade.
And that should give great comfort to people listening to this, particularly those interested in property and in business, that there are going to be 3 million or more people coming to Australia. They're going to need to live in houses. They're going to need to buy goods and products and services. And, okay, it may not happen over the next decade, but it'll happen shortly after. So there's going to be, I think your estimates were suggesting maybe 1.1, 1.4 million fewer people pre-COVID. But, boy, our population is going to grow, isn't it?
It sure is. We will get back to that, and probably at a more sustainable growth pace, which isn't a bad thing, because we were running a little faster than our infrastructure could keep up with. And I think we've seen what we all want is a sustainable property market, sustainable development of our cities, where we can maintain not only the growth, but the lifestyle that we've come to appreciate. When we have surveyed Australians and asked them about population growth in Australia and migration particularly, people are fine with that. In fact, we've all come from some part or other of this world at some point, apart from Indigenous Australians. And so we are a nation of migration and a nation of diversity, and we welcome that, Australians generally. But when they do start to push back on that growth is when the infrastructure is not keeping pace, when the waiting lists increase, when the congestion is greater, or when it takes longer to get to work. And so as long as we can manage the city planning and the infrastructure, Australians welcome that growth, and it has been quite a boon to our GDP over the last few decades as well.
Oh, I can see that it's going to be necessary to import all these people to support our economy and the debt the government's taken on and grow the GDP. It's the quickest way of doing it, having more people in the economy spending. But you were talking about the cities. I mean, it's a shame to see what's happened to our capital cities at the moment, or many of them that are just dead, they're empty. Will we get back to living in the cities, Mark? Will they house even more people than they have before moving forward? Will we be going back there for retail in the future?
We sure will. Our cities and our CBDs have a bright future. And this is where we need to take a longer lens of understanding where we're headed, not just look at what's happening now or over the next year. And we are seeing low occupancy rates in those commercial buildings in the city. We are seeing residential demand drop because people don't need to be close to the CBDs for work reasons at the moment. So we sometimes look at that and we say, well, that's it. CBDs don't have a future. Our cities are on the wane. Everyone's heading to the regions. Well, actually, you don't get 150 years investment in these CBDs of our largest capitals without them being around for the long term. Actually, our CBDs, our capital cities, have a brighter future than ever. Now, the B part of the CBD acronym may not be as strong, the business part, but they'll become CLDs, central lifestyle districts. There will be more retail. There will be destinations for entertainment. There will be more residential in our cities. And of course, they will be premium workplaces as well. Now, our workspaces, we can work from home. There's going to be more decentralized work hubs around the place. But we also know from a timeless human and work perspective that we work well when we interact with others. And so while the work from home experiment has been fine and it's got us through, long term, we're going to be connecting at least a couple of times per week with colleagues in an office or a workplace. And that means the CBDs will still have a role there as well. So they'll be lifestyle districts of the future. They'll actually be more vibrant because they won't just have life between 9 and 5 p.m. 5 days a week. They'll be global cities. They'll be 24/7 cities. And there'll be a lot of action just beyond work alone.
So clearly, the future work is going to be more a hybrid model with a mixture of working from home and in the workplace. But this is probably also going to have an impact then on where we want to live and how we want to live and what sort of properties we're going to want to live in. Neighbourhood has become more important than ever, hasn't it, Mark?
That's right. Community is so important. In COVID, we have reprioritized our values. We've recognized that what we had pre-COVID, chasing ever more earnings, buying more and more stuff, just living for the now was okay, but it actually and ultimately didn't satisfy. People have reprioritized their life. They're valuing relationships. They're looking for purpose. They're wanting to have impacts, and they see the importance of community. And that is best met through workplaces, through neighborhoods, and people are valuing that. We had for a while this growth in the vertical communities. People would live in these units, they were close to work, but they didn't value the local or geographical community. They were almost dormitories, a lot of those apartment blocks, and indeed some of the outer suburbs as well. They call them vampire suburbs because no one's around there except at night. The day, they're desolate because everyone's commuting and in the cities to work. That's changing. People are living and working and playing and shopping closer to where they live. And so we're seeing life in the suburbs. We're seeing a reinvigoration of our regional areas, and we're seeing people chase community. And that will be key to the future. And that's where I think COVID has many silver linings. It's going to bring a renewed and reinvented life to our cities. It's bringing a lot of growth to the regional areas, which is fantastic. It's rebalancing our population away from just our capital cities, and it's helped us rebalance life, all of which is important.
Well, with many of us living in a COVID cocoon at the moment, many Australians are looking at moving out of the big smoke, maybe moving into regional Australia. And as we were saying, this is, I guess, more doable now with the more flexible working hours. What are your findings regarding the rise of the regions in your report?
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. It's been a strong trend since COVID. Now, if we think about the Australian psyche, heading bush or having dreams of going bush has been part of the Aussie myth, part of an aspiration for a long time. Of course, Banjo Patterson used to write about this and the city folk with dreams of, going bush. And the sea change and the tree change we've seen a bit of over the last few decades. But what it took was the catalyst of COVID to decouple work from workplace and allow us to move wherever we wanted to. That's what grew the growth in the regions, really unlocked us from our cities because we had the freedom to actually chase lifestyle and affordability, which are better met in regions than cities, but we could still keep our city job through online or hybrid learning and working. And so that's been a benefit as well. And it's here to stay because the technology is here to stay. And so, sure, as I said, we might commute 1 or 2 days a week. We might work from a more local work hub, but we can do a lot more work from home. And so we can live further afield from where our head office may have been. And that, I think, is bringing growth to the regions investment in the regions, real opportunities and lifestyle there. With demographic growth, particularly in these smaller population centres, comes investment, comes growth, comes jobs. It's a virtuous cycle. So we've, in a sense, taken some of the pressure off our biggest capitals. We've grown the regions that were looking for that growth. We've rebalanced the population, and it's been a win-win.
Well, the government's been trying to do that for a long time, hasn't it? Decentralise things. So you're right, it took a pandemic to push this along. Just looking forward to 2031, what's the composition of the workforce going to be as baby boomers are getting older? I guess some of them are still going to have to work. They're going to remain in the workforce part-time, full-time. But what's the composition going to look like?
Well, it'll mirror the composition and trends of our population. So what we have in Australia is an aging population. By that, we mean a longer living population. So it's a good news story. And with a longer living population, people are able to work later. We're in a knowledge economy. We're not swinging axes or shovels. So we can work later. The physical, the body doesn't give out when you're a knowledge worker on a computer. In fact, it grows because our wisdom, experience, contacts, and knowledge grows. So people will be able to work later in life and work longer. And so we'll have an increasing age range in the workforce because we're still going to get those young recruits and that young talent coming in. In other words, we'll have more generations in the workforce. We're going to start to see a transition from us 20th century generations to these 21st century generations making up the dominance of the workforce, Generation Y and Z and Generation Alpha. So in 2031, we will have 6 generations in the workplace. We will have more, not only generational diversity and gender diversity, but cultural diversity as well. In fact, our workplace will be a global one where we will be connecting with people, not just who are remote working in other states or cities, but of course, other countries as well. And that's the catalyst of COVID and of the new technology and of work from home. It has brought about trends that otherwise would not have happened, even though the enablers of the technology were already there. And so catalytic trends, as well as generational trends, as well as some of these demographic trends really are driving our future, driving workforce, driving demand, driving where the wealth accumulation pockets will be. And they're important trends to look at for any investor as we look to the future.
Sure. Well, as we do look to the future over the next decade, many baby boomers are going to move into their retirement years to enjoy what's meant to be the longest holiday of their life. But what did your research show about Australians being ready for retirement financially?
Well, firstly, that was one of the biggest financial regrets in this recent study where we asked Australians, how are you travelling financially? And the answer was not particularly well. In some ways, people are relying on superannuation, which isn't quite doing the job. In some ways, we've been just struggling to pay down the mortgage and so haven't done too much financial planning. And when we asked Australians, what's your biggest regret? It was firstly that they hadn't started to plan their future earlier. And secondly, they have regretted some of these purchases, particularly depreciating assets, perhaps the car upgrade that they didn't really need. Maybe in COVID, we've spent a bit of money on boats or caravans or other toys, which may not be used as much when we get back to life that we knew. And I think some of that's great for lifestyle and for relational purposes. But I think managing the money, thinking about retirement, planning for the future is important because, as we've said, based on the trends, we're living longer. The average person being born today, life expectancy at birth is going to take them into the late 80s. They're going to be active later in life. They're going to spend more money throughout that active stage of their life. They're not going to want to go into supported aged care. They want to age in place in their own house and with their own services. So that's expensive, and it does require a nest egg to enable those options. So planning for our future is key. Now, we are going to see people, as I said, work later, and so keep that earnings going, not just because they'll need to, but because they'll want to make that contribution and keep active. But nonetheless, that financial planning, thinking about our future, not relying on government payments, which are going to be under pressure in an era of structural deficits, an aging population, and declining taxpayer funds. Not relying on government, not relying on super, but taking charge of some of our own financial future is going to be key for our own planning long term.
Did you find a gender gap, a difference between females and males with regard to their financial position and readiness for retirement?
We did, and it was interesting there. Males have been the larger earners with a significantly larger superannuation nest egg, but women are more active in planning for their retirement. I think, as a lot of women tend to do, they think about not just the current situation but the future, and are more proactive in that risk management, in that future planning, and in preparing for a rainy day or their retirement. Women, of course, are going to live longer on average than men, still in Australia, about 3 years longer. And so that's important as well. But the good news for the emerging generations is that gender gap on earnings and superannuation is decreasing. In fact, in some key areas of for university graduates, women are out earning men now. And they're in demand, particularly in sectors that have been male-dominated, and so are very much in demand in a lot of those STEM subjects, engineering, etc. So we're seeing a changing of the guard there in some ways, a balancing of that retirement nest egg, and I think this emerging generation will continue to close that gap.
I was pleased to see in your research that Australians are feeling good about their financial future. They believe they're going to be in a better position in a decade's time than they are today.
Yeah, the optimism of Australians continues to come through, and maybe it's because of COVID. We've sort of been through a recession and maybe on the verge of a second one. We've seen the uncertainties. We saw 1 million people be stood down from work almost overnight as COVID first hit in 2020. We've seen the volatility on the stock market. We've seen the increase in housing inaffordability at a time when wages have been stagnant and the economy's been uncertain. And so because of that, maybe with that in mind, Australians have certainly looked at their own finances and taken action there. They've appreciated the stability of jobs. They have thought about their own future. They've tried to pay down debt. But also, they do see that the next 3 years will be better than the last three. And I think there's a reasonable expectation that will come to pass. But it's great to have that optimism because it actually helps the economy. We know that consumer sentiment has a direct impact on economic activity, because if we feel that the future is good, we're more likely to be able to invest a bit and spend a bit and be a little bit active as consumers. And that's going to then play out. That sentiment plays out in reality by actually bolstering the economy rather than having us all bunkering down back under the doona. We've had enough of that over the last year and a half.
It's been good to see this time around the consumer sentiment hasn't plummeted like it did in the first lockdowns. I guess we're starting to get used to it. Mark, one of the other things I've noticed over the last decade is the shift in consumer behaviour with the growth in digital stores rather than bricks and mortar retail. And obviously this has been enhanced by COVID, where you can't walk into stores and people don't really want to handle cash. Look, I know over the last year I've actually now only tap my phone or just use my Apple Watch. I don't even pull out a credit card anymore. Mark, are we moving into a cashless society?
We are. And COVID has again been the catalyst to accelerate this, even though, of course, we had contactless payments and credit and cashless society pre-COVID. COVID accelerated it to the point now that 1/3 of Australians at this moment don't have any cash in their wallet, and even higher with the younger generation. So we are moving that way, and Australians have been quite innovative with their adoption of payment methods, and that will continue. Australians have been quite resilient to roll with the changes that COVID has given, and that's been helpful as well. So, and even just as an aside, the engaging of cryptocurrencies has been quite interesting in Australia, but we are often on the cutting edge of adoption of these things, and Australians, particularly younger generations, haven't been shy there. But the good thing is it's the land of common sense as well. We often use that phrase, be fair income, and Australians like to invest in something that they see as solid. So we haven't gone all out for crypto. There's a bit of skepticism around that, which I think is wise and prudent, and love the good old Aussie house. Bricks and mortar, safe as houses. Give me the Aussie dream of a place I own and a patch of dirt, and that's not a bad wealth vehicle for the future as well. And even the next generation say that Aussie dream is alive and well for them, even though it's going to take longer to get there and they might need the bank of mum and dad to help them. They're still setting on that course to get a place of their own. Even if it's a rent vesting approach and they just want to own a place that they may not live in, it's still a good way forward, and the next generation are embracing that.
Well, sure. In fact, the last couple of years has really been a cycle of upgraders, Mark, from tenants moving to their first home because of all the grants, from established homeowners upgrading their homes or improving their locations because they want to live differently. Their needs have changed, their preferences have changed. What has your research found about how people want to live, what sort of homes they want to live in moving forward?
We said earlier that community is key and lifestyle matters, but affordability is the equation that makes all of that possible. So that's the conundrum Australians are in. The livability, the lifestyle, the location, the community, all is key. And then finding a way to make that happen financially is what they're looking for. So we are starting to see a few positive moves there. We're seeing the younger generation become more realistic. And for a while there, they almost wanted to start their economic life in the manner in which they saw their parents finish their economic life, in that nice leafy suburb with the 4 or 5 bedroom home. Now, clearly that's not possible. And that's not how their parents got there. They finished there. They didn't start there. And we're now seeing young people say, you know what, maybe the cheaper apartment in the outer suburb is the start, the studio. I'll just get something and upgrade from there. That makes sense. The good opportunities now are that there are units and apartments and new developments right across the city. They can, in fact, stay near their parents or friends where they've been growing up, but live in an apartment instead of a detached house. So we're seeing realism come to young people. We're seeing them say, hey, I don't want to live there, but I can afford to buy there, so I'll at least buy there and see how that plays out. We're also seeing parents come to the party there, and sometimes it's as joint tenants in the purchasing or parents guarantoring that. But it does mean that they can get started. Sometimes it's the multi-generational household where the parents and the children can buy the place. The parents can stay there longer, but over time, the children can pay it down. And all of these innovative options are helping young people get into the property. But here's the point, that those timeless values of a home that you own for family, where you can connect with an area and feel part of a community and entertain and achieve all of those things that your parents and grandparents had, is still what we see. So it's the human-centric trend. Our future is not some Jetsons lifestyle that might have been predicted in some of these sci-fi areas, but actually what our parents saw and experienced, the security of the home in the suburb, even having a backyard, a bit of greenery. We've seen rise in COVID, appreciating a detached home and not just common areas and bump spaces that apartments give, has given a bit more of a boost in a pandemic. So the future in some ways is a repeat of the past with its new approaches and new generations, but certainly with some of those timeless values emerging.
Sure. I was impressed to see that about 50% of the respondents to your survey said they were planning on looking for a new home, and 22% were extremely likely to look for a new home in the next couple of years. And of course, a lot of them want a home office. We all need a Zoom room nowadays, don't we? But Malcolm, when we look back in a decade at these difficult years, 2020, 21, and I guess next year, 22, how are we going to feel in looking back in a decade? What are we going to think? In particular, what are the young people, what are the students going to think about their lost years?
Well, it has been a challenging time. COVID has impacted everyone. And from a health perspective and perhaps a vulnerability perspective, it's impacted older people more because they have been more vulnerable. And we've seen the challenge of those in their older years. But from a financial perspective and a social perspective, it's impacted young people more. And so the anxiety it's created, the sense of loss that they've experienced, and even the mental health challenges, it's impaired young people to a greater degree. They're at the point of life where the social matters. I mean, us more established generations, we're fine with working from home, and we've established our households, and we don't have a lot of those milestones of year 12 graduations or university or the campus lifestyle or 21st. I mean, we've been there and done that. And I'm sure we feel the pain of young people having so many of their plans, their opportunities to travel overseas, a lot of those goals of activities and camps and conferences, and just the early years of learning that you get in a job when you're in a workplace that you can't as much get working from home. We've felt their loss. But we've researched them and found them to be very resilient. And there have been benefits that they've experienced that they wouldn't have got if it was business as usual. So I actually see that this will and is creating in young people a fortitude, a character formation, a sense of resilience that their great-grandparents experienced who lived through the Great Depression or World War II. And so actually a global challenge like this, when it hits in your formative years, can create a character, a financial conservatism, a preparedness for the future that prosperity can never bring. So adversity brings gifts and benefits that we don't wish on anyone, you don't plan for, you don't hope for. But when it comes, it actually creates the person. It brings on an adulthood, an independence that otherwise might not have come. And I think that's the unseen benefit of COVID for young people, tough as it's been.
It does seem tough now, but I agree with you. When we look back, we're going to live through this and have come out different people and hopefully better people, because the world is changing. But we've often heard that the only constant in life is change. But thank you for giving us some insights into the demographic changes, the consumer changes, the attitudinal trends that we're going to have in 2031. And it leaves us with hope. It suggests that once we get through this, and there definitely is a light at the end of the tunnel, once we get through this, life's going to be good again. And we're living in the best country in the world. And when we look back, we're probably going to even recognise it's probably the best time in the world in history.
Yeah, absolutely. It is going to, Australia is built on this national character, this community mindedness, this adaptation, this resilience, hey, we will get through somehow or other. It's a can-do country. And I think COVID has shown that once again. And the old phrase, this too will pass. And we'll get back to some of what we knew, and it'll look a bit different. It will look a bit different, but I think there's going to be a lot of positives in it, and we'll come out on the other side. I think with the Aussie optimism and resilience shining brightly indeed.
Well, I know you love working with businesses, so I'm going to leave a link in the show note about Australia Towards 2031, your report, where people can get it for free, read about it, learn about the future, and also learn about what McCrindle does. Thank you for your time today, Mark.
Delight, Michael, as always. Thank you.
It was great to hear from Mark McCrindle that life's going to be normal again. Look, deep down inside, we all knew that, but there's doubts that come when there's the continual barrage of negative messages in the media. And if you think about what life's going to be like in a decade, we heard from Mark that life's going to be good. Our property markets are going to be strong as well. And successful investors don't just think about this weekend. The average Australian thinks about what's going to happen this weekend, of course, and investors in general think about what's going to happen in a year or two, but very successful investors think about what's going to happen in a decade, and mega successful investors think about what's going to happen 30, 40 years down the track. They think about intergenerational wealth. So that's why I wanted to give you some background that, yes, in 2031, life's going to be pretty good. But what are you going to do between now and then to make sure you're in the right position? Because when this cycle finishes, and it will, I've probably got another year or so to go, maybe 18 months. And then there's going to be the regular lag phase, the slump phase of the property cycle. And you've got to be left with the right sort of properties that are going to outperform and are going to do well. So if you want to know what to do, how to do things, where to buy, how to structure yourself, why not have a chat with my team at Metropole? Go to metropole.com.au and find out about what we do. And it always starts with putting a strategic plan together for you. And then we'll help you implement the plan to help you in a holistic way, because we offer buyer's agency, wealth advisory, financial planning, property management, renovations, development, home buying, and even Business Accelerator Mastermind with Mark McCrindle to help those business people and professionals. Now, you won't need all of those services, but we provide a holistic approach to help our clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth. Go to metropole.com.au Find out about what we do. Why not inquire about your options? I'd love to be part of your ongoing wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I want to show you 11 valuable insights into how to fail at life. Hey, what's Michael talking about? Well, you wait on and you'll hear, because I found, generally speaking, people live their lives in one of two ways, either happily and successfully or miserably with loads of regrets about what could have happened. Those who are happy and successful don't necessarily have a more blessed or lucky life than the other mob. In fact, they could live in the same type of house, have the same family situation, have the same job, have the same assets. So what sets up these two polar opposite ways of living apart? And personally, I think it's got a lot to do with how we choose to live our life, with the things that happen to us as we go along the way. You see, let's take mistakes and failures. While perceived mistakes and failures knock some people down, it knocks them down for a long time. Others learn from them. They get right back up. They just do things a bit differently according to the lessons they've learned. Now, I remember one of my mentors, Jim Rohn, the late Jim Rohn, once said, "It's just too bad that failures don't give seminars, because understanding why some people never seem to get anywhere in terms of happiness and success, no matter how hard they try, that could be a very valuable learning tool." So in today's mentorship session, rather than giving you the standard 10 tips on how to be successful or something like that, I'm going to show you 10 things you should never do if you want a rewarding life. Or maybe we should actually look at it differently, tips that you should do if you want to fail. So the number one thing you should do if you want to fail is just cruise. Go along day by day. I mean, who needs to set goals? Why don't you just wait and see what happens, what takes your fancy when you wake up, and stumble along through each day? If you want to fail in life, the next thing you should do is stay in your comfort zone. Think about it. To grow as a human being requires work, and more often than not, it requires embracing the unknown. But I don't want to stress. Instead, just remain safely in your own little cozy zone. As we're looking at things you should be doing if you want to fail in life, one of them is just believe in nothing. Cynicism requires a lot less work than believing in something, because if you do, then you might actually have to do something about it. So why don't you just go around pointing out flaws in everything and always looking for what could go wrong? You want to fail in life? Talk a lot. I mean, why bother listening to what other people have got to say? After all, you know it all. So make sure you tell your story, and you tell it often, no matter how much it bores other people. If you want to fail in life, then don't risk failure. The next tip on how to fail at life is don't risk failure. The answer is don't try, because we all know the best way to avoid rejection and pain is not to do anything. Of course, you should also take care of number one. Maintaining friendships and relationships, that takes time and energy, not to mention the potential sacrifices you might be forced to make and the sheer inconvenience of it all. Why not just look after yourself? That's all that matters. Again, surefire way to fail in life is never take the blame. Apologising or being responsible for your own actions, oh, look, that's so yesterday. Just look at all the litigation that goes on in our modern world as people seek to find somebody else for the fault that's going on in their life. Remember, it's always somebody else's problem, not yours, isn't it? Another way to fail in life is sleep a lot. Make sure that you sleep a lot. Sure, there are only so many hours in the day, but why spend them accomplishing things and progressing when you could be getting a bit of sleep? Another way, of course, is always defend your point of view. Remember, that's the only one that counts. If somebody disagrees with you, don't let it go unchallenged. Make as much noise as you can until they give up on the debate. Another way, of course, is to stay guarded. Trust can easily lead to hurt, to heartache. So keep your walls up. Don't let anyone in. Never ever. Of course, the last message I'm going to give you about how to fail in life is always expect the worst. If you walk around expecting something good to happen, chances are you're just going to get disappointed anyway, aren't you? So don't risk that self-doubt and angst that can accompany unmet expectations. Surrender instead to the philosophy that life sucks. So in conclusion, if you want to live a self-fulfilling prophecy of life full of disappointment and despair, and ultimately be a loser, Just follow these 11 ideas I've just given you. On the other hand, if you want happiness and success, perhaps see if you can have a long conversation with somebody who's never found success and learn more about what not to do. Well, thanks for spending the last half an hour or so with me. You now have some insights into what's ahead for Australia over the next decade and 11 insights in how to fail at life. If you got some benefit from today's show, please tell somebody else about it. Help me in my quest to make as many people financially fluent and successful in life as possible. By the way, our listenership grows continuously, so welcome to all the new listeners and new subscribers, but help others find out about this as well. There's enough wealth around for everybody. I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me in between these podcasts on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney, and why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update private Facebook group, where every day I leave some tips, some charts, something different that you won't get elsewhere from me. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?